What's up everybody, welcome to a new episode of Bass Habits. Today we're going to talk about Type O Negative and their singer and bass player Peter Steele. If you weren't a teenage metalhead in the mid-90s, you probably never heard of Type O Negative. The band formed in New York in 1989 and reached fame in 1993 when their third album, Bloody Kisses, went platinum. Their musical style has been labeled gothic rock, and their lyrical emphasis on themes of romance, depression and death resulted in the nickname the Drab Four. At the center of the band stood bass player and lead singer Peter Steele, a towering giant with a deep voice and a dark sense of humor that, combined with his aggressive bass style, created the backbone of the sound of Type O Negative. In metal terms, Steele was perfect for his time. Even Beavis and Butthead famously compared the video for Black No. 1 to a cross between Danzig and Megadeth.
I think they're like a cross between Danzig and my butt.
Over the years, Peter has become an iconic figure in the metal world, and his extremely personal bass style made him into a very influential bass player too, that inspired thousands of people to pick up the instrument. So let's have a look at some of the facts that make Peter Steele a bass player you need to know. Number 1, the tone. Peter used a variety of basses during his career, and his gear has been already discussed, so we're gonna leave that out. However, there's a few things you can do to get a good Peter Steele tone out of pretty much any bass and amp combination. First of all, tune down to B. Peter's basses were tuned B-E-A-D, which is pretty unusual because that's a standard tuning of a 5-string bass, so why not use a 5-string? But the extra low tuning was probably handy to match his bass voice type. However, Pete credited Black Sabbath and the Beatles as his key musical influences, so he obviously liked Paul McCartney and Geezer Butler, and he probably wasn't into 5-string basses that much. At some point, he stated he started using an actual B string, but to me, most of the tracks sounded tuned. Anyway, the point is you can get a Peter Steele tone either with a 4 or a 5-string bass. The second element are effects. Peter used plenty of effects on his bass, including chorus and delay. However, the most notable was a huge amount of distortion, for which he used a Boss DS1, which is a guitar pedal, and you can tell that he probably didn't like to change settings very much. Third, Peter used Dunlop Thorex 50mm picks, which he held in a very unusual way. This is a pretty light pick for a bass guitar, so the result, especially on parts where Peter would normally strum away chords, is a hybrid sound somewhere in between a bass and a rhythm guitar. Number 2, descending chromatic scales. Like most bands of the 90s, Type O Negative made a large use of chromatic harmony, and many of Peter Steele's bass lines were based on descending chromatic scales, like Creepy Green Light. This type of scale can also be used together with a root note pedal tone, in Steele's cases happening on a higher note instead of a lower one, as it's common on bass guitar. So it's technically an arpeggio, once again a guitar technique adapted for bass with amazing results. This type of pedal tone can also consist of a little riff, always alternating with the changing chords on the lower register. Another technique normally used on guitar that's still adapted for its clean parts to create a chilling atmosphere, very handy to get a dramatic effect on slower songs.
like a flash of light.
Number 5. Chords. As we already pointed out, Steele was strumming chords, especially on choruses, using mainly power chords, as it's typical on bass. Two-note chords are also pretty common in the music of Type O Negative, such as in September Sun, for example.
Leave her alone. I said leave her.
Number 6. Write parts for bass and vocals only. Despite the technical aspects, Steele was a great songwriter and he obviously wrote most of the music on bass. As a result, it's pretty common in the music of Type O Negative to hear parts where Peter sings accompanied only by his bass guitar.
Loving herself. She likes the dark. But on her mirror. So every day will be easy.
The combination of his bass guitar and his super low voice was the driving force that pushed the sound of Type O Negative, and definitely its most defining trait. During the 90s, Peter Steele was a teenager's fantasy, a giant rebel who perpetually flipped his finger to the authority. And though not very technically demanding, his bass playing combined with his persona inspired thousands of people to pick up the bass guitar and start a band, proving once again that personality and charisma lead to originality, and originality doesn't require an advanced technique. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment and follow me on Instagram.